Welcome to the second session of the day. I'm Yusuf from the Hara team. We're delighted to welcome Margrét Helgadóttir to Hara for a conversation, mainly about the anthology she's edited. We're going to talk about that in a minute. A bit about Margrét. Margrét is a Norwegian Icelandic writer and anthology editor living in Oslo. Her stories have appeared in a number of magazines and print anthologies, and her debut book, The Stars Seem So Far Away, was a finalist for the British Fantasy Awards in 2016. Margrét is the editor of the anthologies Nordic Visions, Winter Tales, and the series Fox Spirit Book of Monsters. 7 volumes of which were published between 2014 and 2020. 3 volumes were shortlisted for the British Fantasy Awards for Best Anthology, and Margrét was awarded the Starburst magazine's Brave New Words Award in 2018 for her work as editor on Pacific Monsters. We're going to invite questions from the audience in due course, but I'd like to begin by asking you some questions of my own. What personally draws you to speculative fiction and figure of the monster in particular? What creative possibilities does it kind of afford?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. Speculative fiction is something really breaking boundaries, escape from real life. So I think from I was a little child, I've always been drawn to science fiction, fantasy, and horror because it was a good escape possibility. And also horror is interesting in what scares us. I've always had a scare of the dark. I was always looking for monsters under my bed when I was a little girl. And as I grew up, I've been kind of philosophic about it. What is actually scary about that monster under the bed? Maybe other things are more scary. And I've been reflecting on it. I was really lucky when I had a chance to actually be editor of stories about monsters.
And how did the anthology series Fox Spirit Book of Monsters come about? You describe it as a grand world tour. Could you talk a bit about the structure of the anthology and how the authors were invited or selected?
Sure. The inspiration was quite many years ago. It was when X was called Twitter and everyone was on Twitter. I was discussing monsters with a British author who just came out with a book about werewolves. And we were discussing, this was just after the Twilight movies, and there were so many movies about vampires and werewolves, and we're like, okay, but where are the other monsters? Where are they? We all know about the werewolves, the vampires, the demons, the zombies, the ghouls, but is that the only monsters? And so we actually thought that the monster kind of need a renaissance. We have to bring them out in the light. And we pitched this to a British publisher. Happily, the owner said yes, and we could make the first volume. And since that was a success, she also agreed to make a series of the whole world. So it's 7 volumes covering all the continents. It's between 15 and 20 stories from each continent. Europe, Africa, Asia, Pacific, South America, North America, and the Eurasian area at last. This was my work for like 8 years. I spent almost a year on each book. I was always working on the next book while I was editing on my current book, and then I was doing marketing for the last book. So it's kind of like a flow for 8 years. I spent maybe 1 year researching for each book, and maybe the most difficult part was because, especially from volume 2, we wanted local authors to tell the stories. And not everyone speaks English out there. So even locating authors willing and interested in writing monster stories were quite difficult. And also because I didn't want books with like 20 vampire stories. I really wanted to have them diverse also in what kind of monsters. So I slowly build up the books. I would invite maybe 2-3 authors, and then I waited until they had decided if they wanted to contribute and what kind of monster, and then I would move on. So maybe just building the table of contents took like 3-4 months, and that's quite much in the inviting process for anthology. So I think I got better at researching authors as the volumes went on, but the first were kind of exciting because I didn't know anything about Africa, like that was the second volume, and Asia, etc. So I could maybe tell a little bit about what did I tell them?
Yeah,
because,
yes, please.
Yeah. The first volume was authors from all over, and we said, yeah, we want monsters from Europe. And I think that volume kind of sticks out because you could tell it's maybe the Hollywood versions. I'm going to say a little bit about that volume later. But for the rest of the books, I invited authors and I said, what kind of monster do you wish to pick out from your own culture, from your own country or the region where you live in? It could be mythology, it could be folklore, it could even be a made-up monster from modern times, and then was the invitation. The limits were, because there are some cliches in monster folklore and horror, I specifically said, I don't want erotica, because as probably many knows, there's a lot of paranormal romance. I didn't want that. I didn't want splatter, like overly gory stories. Mm-hmm. But of course you can use blood and gory things, but it has to make sense in the plot. It doesn't, like just for spectacular. I didn't want it. It should be entertainment. It should matter. And also, I didn't want it to be human monsters. So it should be like the beasts or demons and other things, but not like serial killer stories or that kind of stuff. So that was, I think I succeeded.
Yes, definitely did.
Yeah.
You point out in the introduction to this volume that humans of all times, regardless of geography, culture, or demography, have created stories about monsters. Why do you think this is? Why are we so obsessed with creating monsters? Does it serve any kind of function?
I'm not an academic, so maybe you can ask question or maybe say something against me later, but yeah. I think from all back in ancient times in mythology, we needed someone to blame when things happened that we couldn't explain, whether people died suddenly, a ship went down in the ocean, a thunder or something happened, and we couldn't explain it, so we needed an explanation. We also needed, in more maybe the religions matter, we needed explanation about how was the world created, how is it going to end someday, and what happens, etc. So I think the history is old. It's like you look at old sea maps, for instance, of oops. If you look at old sea maps, for instance, from all the earliest trade ships, maybe 1500, it's like, yeah, they didn't know, it was something foreign. They, like whales were looked at like monsters because they didn't know what they were. But I've been speculative in, I think monsters has always played a role. First, for society, it's a way of controlling something. You could say something, maybe that house, you don't want people to go to that house because it's haunted. So it's kind of an explanation, a kind of control. You have to people stay away from that building or place. It can also be a punishing. It can be often, sadly, women are exposed for this. In some way, behavior. You can also be punished, and monster stories are a good way of explaining if you do that and that, you turn into a monster, and usually the monster gets killed, so it's kind of a dark story. And also it's maybe more a educational one for small children. Like Inuit children in Greenland, they are told not to go near the coast, the seawater, because of course you can drown if you haven't learned to swim. But the parents can't watch over the children all the time. They have to, play freely. So there's stories about this sea mermaids, sea people, really scary with, sharp teeth, and they're going to snatch the children and eat them if the children are too foolish to go near the coast. So this is just one example, and I think all cultures all over the world have that kind for small children. It's kind of like we maybe call in English boogie tales. So it's kind of educational one, a moral story, and also society control power. And of course the religion has their own dark stories. So in that way, monsters is either something to blame, something to explain, or something to control. And so you could probably say a lot about the psychology thing about monsters, but I think the cultural aspect is really interesting because of that.
Yeah, and if I might add, it also seems to me that we create these figures to define kind of our own societies and what we are in relation to what the monster is. So we are what the monster is not, and kind of vice versa. So I'm really interested in that dialectical relationship.
Exactly. There's somebody say, I can't recall who, but they say like monsters could be the human's mirror. You look, maybe the monster tells something about the humans and how monsters actually humans can be.
Definitely. To go back to the anthology a little bit, so in folklore studies there are classification systems like the A to U and the motif index, which kind of help identify patterns of narratives across different geographies. So the index has categories like transformation by a witch, fight with a dragon, the figure of a talking frog, treacherous stepmothers, and so on. And we can see kind of elements of these in folk tales across vast regions. Looking at Eurasian monsters in particular, do you see any common threads that might fit into kind of any motif category? Are there any archetypes that kind of recur?
Absolutely. Eurasian monsters, as you can see the cover of behind us, is the last volume. I can maybe say something afterwards because I see there are some regional differences throughout the world. And Eurasian monsters covers the region, Eurasia, quite vast region. So it's all the way up to China, not including China, and all the way to East Europe. So I have stories from Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Moldova, Poland, Hungary, and also Bulgaria. And this book came out November 2020, so it was just before Russian invasion in Ukraine. So it's quite special to have so many stories from both of these. The common phrase in this book is two kind of monsters, I think, that pops out. One is, you can especially see that people have migrated and moved in this part of the world. So there's a lot of Slavic folklore behind lots of these stories. Especially we have many stories about spirits, demons, quite many takes place. I must say after reading these stories that kitchen and the bedroom are truly scary places in some of these places. And there's something about what takes place when you sleep, when you're helpless, and also what takes place in your own home, in your kitchen. And quite many of these stories center around this. And also lots of spirits walking in the mountains and in the forests, usually either girls who died before they got married, or girl babies who didn't get Christian, so before they died, and so they hunt us. So it's kind of more etherical, like ghosts, spirits, kind of monsters. The other kind is more concrete. It's like you have almost like old gods kind of monsters, like the dragon occurs. You have the hala in the Bulgarian folklore, which is connected to lightning, and so they're kind of concrete, huge monsters actually. So these are maybe some of the most common traits, but this is one of the books where I allowed a monster story about the same monster several times actually. And there's 3 stories about a kitchen spirit called the domovoi. I don't know if anybody heard about it. But I allowed it because it is an example of a monster who has developed. It's a house spirit who followed people when they changed home and country. And so actually these 3 stories are quite different, and the domovoi is so different. There's a story from Ukraine, there's a story from Russia, and there's a story from Poland, and the 3 domovois are quite different. So it's really interesting actually to see the same monster but told with 3 different regions.
So patterns of migration maybe influence recurring themes of the home and so on. What about the differences between the regions? Do you think geographical factors play a role in the kind of different stories we get?
Absolutely. I think it is, but I also think these books kind of explain it, because I see quite differences in kind of monsters the authors choose to write about. I could tell some things, like Eurasian, I said, was mostly kind of spirits. They're quite concerned about the home. It can be compared to maybe Asian region, who is also very spirits, but it's usually because they have quite much belief in ancestors. So many of the monster stories about their relationship with the dead ancestors, or even the dead children. So mostly the spirits is quite different, alike in these 2. And also colonialism, sorry, you can hear I don't speak English on a daily basis. Like Africa, you can see that people are really concerned about the African soil and coming back. Maybe they have migrated. And this is quite, it sticks out. It's quite similar, perhaps a little bit to the Europe, but I think maybe it's because some of the European stories are told by African writers. I haven't, quite landed on that. And I also see that in African and South American stories, magic really plays a role. You have witch stories, but also nature, like forest or lakes or sea, is kind of a being in themselves, and they often have magic aspects. So it's quite, if you look across the world, I think that, there are some similarities, but they are told differently. And I must say, especially from the 4th volume, Pacific Monsters, I really realized how much it matters to include stories from people with First Nation and Indigenous background. In that volume, I have several stories from authors with Maori and Aboriginal background. And from that volume, I tried also to invite authors with that background in later volumes. And I also, it was really interesting when I tried to build up the North American volume. I spoke with several with Native American background, and they said, no, we're not interested because we feel that we have been exploited, our culture has been exploited, we don't look at this as monsters, but they are portrayed in Hollywood as monsters, etc. But I managed to get a few stories still, but this is typical of like First Nations. And I think it matters where people come from in how we view the world, and this is one of my missions with these books, not only to get monsters from that maybe people have never heard about, maybe even get scared about, because I mean vampires and werewolves, who get scared anymore, everybody knows about them. But it also, one side mission is to show people everyday life and cultures around the world. To get people to tell everyday stories. So even though there's monster stories, it's about how they live, what is important to them. And just a thing like weather, it's different to live in a snow-covered country like where I live. We have different monsters than perhaps south of Africa. And so climate means something, and region. Do you have mountains? Do you have forests? Do you have a lot of migration? Or do you have a kind of static, inhabitation? So it matters. It matters where people come from. And I kind of feel like it's my obligation as an editor to actually seek out that diversity and bring alternatives to the Western portrait of monsters as well, but also, in general.
And it's also interesting to see, we were talking earlier, how societies across the world at around the same time imagine stories about dragons, for example. People think, academics argue that might have to do with dinosaur fossils being found around the world, and then the people living there interpreting the fossils to be kind of dragons. But it's also interesting to see different societies imagining vampires, for example, or dragons in slightly different ways.
Exactly.
But it also points to this kind of commonality across humanity, and maybe this kind of shared subconscious that we have. It's interesting to see that across the kind of anthology and across the stories. So you talk a bit about how you're digging up forgotten monsters, kind of exhuming them, dragging them out from their kind of dark corners. What sort of historical or societal baggage do the monsters bring with them, and what can they say about our very modern world?
The concept of grabbing them from the dark corners is also kind of ironic because, monsters, they kind of lost their function in the modern world. Monsters are there maybe to also scare us, so we have to get them out in the spotlight. And these books are actually meant as coffee table books. They are meant to be in the middle of people's living room and make, have a role. So that was also a side. Can I comment on one thing before? Because you said like there are some kind of the same monsters. I told you about the Domawai, just in the Eurasian is slightly different. But what I see, the same type dragons is one kind of the huge things often connected to evil. But you have also shapeshifters. That's quite common all over the world. Also, and humans' relationship to the wilderness is also quite common. The difference is what kind of animals matter. Like in the Pacific, you have a shark shapeshifter, while you might have something different like a wolf in Europe. So that's fascinating in itself. And then you, of course, have monsters in the sea, but you have, like in the Pacific region, it can be a thing under the Antarctic ice that's more like pale because it's, ice. And then you have the huge kraken in North Sea, so it's kind of different. And I'm sorry, now I lost your question.
No, the question was, we're kind of digging up these ancient creatures and then kind of reconfiguring them,
the history,
rethinking them in a kind of modern world.
I think when I've spoken about these books before, people think they're kind of like fairy tales. Some stories are that, but actually I think what is fun about this is that most of these stories are modern stories. It can be, I have actually one story from the beginning of the corona pandemics, when you had to stay home and suddenly there was someone in your kitchen that shouldn't be there. Just an example, and you have people on the streets of Moscow protesting something, and etc. And I think that often in these stories, you have the monster, but actually the monster's presence tells something about the society as well. And it makes you think, who is actually the monster here? Is it the humans and the society, or is it the beast itself? So I think many of the authors, when they wrote these stories, yes, they put it in a modern society, but they were maybe, when you have read them, maybe you think, oh, maybe the humans were more monstrous than the monsters. They're more cruel. And actually you also see that humans seek out monsters because they are greedy. They may be, like in China, there's a story about a girl who seeks her ancestors' grave because she needs to snare up her feet. You know what that is? And she has to have small feet because she doesn't have any luck in love. And so she wakes up her ancestor just to do that. And that's kind of an example of how humans, they do use the monsters. Says something about the human nature as well. I think many of these stories in modern time. So what I think is really cool, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of maybe a little bit biased since I'm the editor, but something I think is really cool, especially like in this volume, is that you see every day that people really never have heard about. How is it to be living in Moscow, really? How is it for the Russians? How is it in Ukraine, etc.? And so you get something about how ordinary people, like most authors are, how they view the world. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, you did, I think. This kind of idea of collecting monsters is also kind of interesting and embedded in popular culture with Pokemon, for example, which saw a resurgence, over the pandemic. It's this idea of collecting different monsters, seeking them out. We're obsessed with it. Do you see the emergence of new monsters born out of changes in, ecology, climate change, politics, technology now, with the emergence of AI and so on? Could the anthology stretch to include kind of these contemporary, non-folkloric monsters?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Actually, I wished I could just continue the series. I think if you look back at the last century, you have creatures that, like the Godzilla. Everyone knows the Godzilla, which is created on the basis of nuclear, the atom bomb. Yeah. And then you have, we humans, we are killing the oceans, and I think maybe you can have monster stories or monsters about monsters either rioting against the humans or monsters that actually can survive under such conditions. I've also seen some example of monsters made of plastic, because the oceans are filled with plastic, and so something monstrous is created out of that. If you look at end of the world stories, if you go a future, someone say the only creatures to survive might be insects, cockroaches. And so some monsters can come out of that as well. And of course, as climate change, the oceans are getting warmer, and we are starting to see creatures from the deep sea coming up to the surface. And who knows what's down there? I mean, there can be some really scary monsters coming up. Technology, monsters, I mean, we all have monsters, we have robots and cyborgs for quite many years. And I mean, we had Frankenstein history, that's over 100 years old. Probably we will have some already, we have the Matrix movies and stuff like that about something we can't control around artificial intelligence in the system, but maybe it's not that concrete as the beasts are. But who knows? If some really creative author can maybe find some creature who is hidden somewhere inside the internet, that would be really cool, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to me like we're going to keep inventing new monsters that are both the kind of product of their times, but also point towards something more timeless in a sense, like the monsters in this in the anthology. And lastly, before we invite questions from the audience, how do monsters appear in your own writing? How do you approach kind of the figure of the monster?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I'm also an author myself. I mostly write futuristic stories, but I've actually written a few monster stories as well. Mostly I've written about Norwegian folklore. I've written a story about the grey people who are kind of like gnomes who took care of your farms and animal people, and then you shouldn't, let them get angry at you. You have to take care of the animals. And I've also written about a nightmare, a mara, as we would say, actually in a modern setting, a hotel room, feeding on the guests. And I've written several stories about shapeshifters, both lions and foxes and eagles. And actually I have one story where a lion shapeshifted into human. So I've written lots about scary animals and humans. Actually, I've written one space story, and that's it's a really short story. It's about an alien coming to Earth. It's kind of like looking like an octopus, really scary, a huge thing. And it comes in the backyard of a man. And of course, human, just sees these scary, lots of tentacles flying and like teeth, and gets of course scared and fires at him. But the thing is, the alien is there to tell the human that he's won a big lottery. Actually, he's, but they couldn't communicate, so that's really. And I've also written about a few stories, not nearer about people have yellow eyes, there's something subtle, like maybe they have scales on their hands or something like that. It's really funny to write as an author about things a little bit, it's placed in our society, but it's a little bit outside of the natural. If you can hint at it and you can make people question, something is not quite right, it's really funny. Yeah.
I highly recommend you check out Margaret's writing.
Thank you.
I think it's time to invite some questions from the audience about maybe monsters in general or the anthology. Any takers?
And you can ask in Turkey and someone will translate. Yeah.
I can translate.
Will I Turkish mi sorayım?
Nasıl rahat edersiniz?
Türkçe sorayım. Hani sizin bir daha çevirmenize gerek kalmasın herkese. Hani ben çok merak ettim bir kere bütün bu kitapları. Şunu sormak istiyorum. Canavarlar genelde hani sözlü geleneğe ait. En azından doğuşları itibariyle sözlü geleneğe ait en azından antik canavarlardan bahsediyorsak ya da eski canavarlardan. Ama burada yeniden bir hikaye yazdırıyor yeni yazarlara Margrét ve bu yani sözlü olan, sözlü kültüre ait olan bu yaratıkların yazılı kültürde ortaya çıkış biçiminde ne gibi değişiklikler oluyor? Bunu merak ettim. Çünkü yeni hikayeler bunlar.
So she's curious about the anthology and pointed out that monsters, especially the folkloric kind that we're talking about, usually belong to oral tradition. And here you're inviting authors to kind of rethink them, reimagine them in writing. What sort of differences kind of arise in that process? Not necessarily differences, but could you kind of maybe expound upon?
Like I said, I'm not an academic, so this would be my reflections. Yeah. Yeah. I think some of the stories actually are monsters who come from our oral tradition, and so they have these authors have written them down. But there is, if you read the stories, they're quite different. Some are really literary, like like an author would really write something and it's not oral at all. It's not, you have to read it. And then something is more singing. There's a really, really lovely, sweet, I would actually call it sweet, little story from Hungary. It's told almost singingly, like you would say a folk tale, about a little girl who invites a monster bird inside her home because she thinks this is a cute little chicken. And as she sleeps, it grows and it starts demanding things of her. It wishes to eat her because she's a little girl, it's delicious. And then she realizes she has to trick it. And so the story is not a long story. The story is about how she tricks this monster into, destroying it. And from what I understand, this is based on an old folklore tale in Hungary, and I also think that she wrote it kind of singingly. But of course, if you write things down, you have the room to explain a little bit more. If you tell a story, you are maybe more dependent on how people listen to you. If you write it, people can stop and they can think. If you hear it, you have to take it on the go, so to speak. I think just thinking of myself as an author, I think it's easier to write down how I view the world and how I would tell the story than if I should tell you the story, because then I would just maybe tell it. If you write, you can say something about what does it smell like, how is the light, how is people looking at each other, etc. Well, maybe if you tell how it goes. But I'm not sure if this is correct, but I immediately think that that's the difference. And at the same time, monster stories is something like, something you tell around the campfire to scare people. And if you're a good teller, of course, you will make sounds, like boom, boom, boom. So you will use body language and maybe more engage. I'm not sure. I'm maybe biased because I'm an author myself, so I would, of course, write this boom, boom, but yeah. Did I answer your question?
Ben birazcık konuyu editör ve yayıncı tarafımla ele almak istiyorum. Yazarları nasıl bulduğunu merak ettim. Dünyanın her yerinden hiç tanımadığı, bilmediği kültürlerden o yazarları nasıl seçtiğini merak ettim. Bir de mesela önden yazarı seçip ondan bir gelecek olan yazıları, öyküleri bilmeyen bir editör olarak acaba hayal kırıklığı yaratan öyküler geldi mi ya da geldiğinde onlara karşı tavrı ne oldu? Nasıl bir editoryal süreç ilerletti onu merak ediyorum.
So Seçil is interested in this kind of process as an editor and a publisher. How did you go about finding the authors? Can you talk a bit about the kind of the research process? And were you ever disappointed in a story that came to you? And if so, what kind of feedback did you give them? How was your approach to the project as an editor and maybe as a kind of a researcher?
Yeah, thank you. I can answer the last thing first. Luckily, I have mostly been given, as an editor, brilliant, good stories. But there has been a few I was really disappointed at. And that was mostly because I mean, authors are humans. They will listen to something you say, but it goes like through the ear, through the head. I had it was really good written, but I had like a story about, an erotic story about an octopus.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, no, that's not, and I had to say no. Happily, most authors are quite professional, that we are used to getting no's. I mean, you get really used to rejections as an author. But if you're given a reasons because you didn't follow the guidelines I gave you and stuff like that, it should be okay. How I went through, you know, as I told you, it's easier. This is like 7 books. It gets easier. Like the book 6 and 7 was really easy. The most difficult books were when the authors didn't speak English, like South America, for instance, which and also Eurasian, where people are not speak English or write English on a daily basis. So what I had to do for these numbers, editors and publishers are usually a little network. So I know editors in most of these countries. So I would contact them and ask, do you have some good authors that you would recommend? I started there, and then I would move on. Like in South America, I want the whole region covered. It's like South America, I don't want all the stories from Brazil. I would like also stories from Uruguay, you know, Argentina, etc. And then, but it usually is, maybe on the go, I would ask an author, or on the internet, actually, I also ask the internet, like, I'm looking from authors from Argentina. Who should I look for? And then I also, of course, Googled, read if there were things available. And sometimes I really had to ask people to tell me what is this story about, because Google Translate only brings you so far, and then sometimes it's wrong translations. But I think it's kind of hard to describe, but being an editor is something you do. In Norwegian, we have an expression, we say we go on gut instinct. I would sometimes get a gut instinct about an author or a text, and then I gambled. I took a chance, and usually I was lucky and got a really good story. But like one time, they didn't understand the guidelines and stuff like that.
Were there any stories that did not make the cut in the end, or?
No, actually all, except those few I mentioned that I got a no. The trouble was, like I said, I used so many months. So when I finally got the stories, I had to work, you know, towards a deadline, because my publisher wished to have a book manuscript at some time. And so if the author sent me short stories I couldn't use, then that meant that book had one story less. And kind of sad, because in some books, that maybe that author represented a country and was the sole author. And when either they didn't actually get along to write it, or they didn't meet my guidelines, that meant that there were no stories from that country. So it's kind of sad as an editor. And I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I think these books, especially when you have, like this, are invitations only. It's not like you have, I have another anthology I've edited, I'm working on my 10th book now. One time I had just an open call, I had 100 stories, and that's a different thing than this monster book, going from author to author to author. It's a kind of different method.
What was your favorite volume to edit in the anthology?
I really hate to answer such questions. Maybe the Pacific one, because, like I said, I feel like it was a good balance between the authors in First Nation backgrounds and others. And that volume also got several awards and shortlisting to awards, so it was really paid attention to. I also like the African volume, but mostly because I think at that time, this was like 2015 or 16, African science fiction and speculative fiction has really gained attention the last decades. And when I worked on this book, it was kind of new. So I got some really big names. I have big names in the other volumes as well, but the African volumes are really big names. It's like if you read that, you see the top of all African science fiction and fantasy writers. So, and that's really funny with these books. I think almost everyone I invited said yes right away. I think most, even if they're kind of hotshot authors, they felt it was so fun to be invited to write about own culture. So they just said yes. I got a few no's, but that was not because of the idea, but it was because they didn't have time. And then was the North American volume, like I said, there were few people with First Nation background who didn't trust me, actually.
Çok teşekkürler. Ben de neden bildiğim kadarıyla Türkiye'den, Anadolu'dan ya da Mezopotamya'dan bir canavar yok Eurasian Monsters volümünde. Buradan acaba editör tanıdığınız mı yoktu? Belki hani bir bağlantı kurulur buradaki yayın evleriyle, editörlerle diye bir hani belki bir ihtimal olarak burada da hazır varken yayın evimiz, editörlerimiz o bağ burada kurulur belki diye hani hem teşekkür etmek ama hem de sormak istedim. Teşekkürler.
Ezgi is asking how come there isn't an Anatolian monster or a monster from Mesopotamia? Was it kind of playfully? Yeah, maybe difficult to get hold of an editor in this region, or was there a kind of logistical hurdle?
I also know this. It's not conscious, actually, and you will probably, if you look at the table of contents at what countries I cover, you will see it's not all countries, actually. But I see that there are, even though I cover like 50 countries, I see that there are some blind spots, and sadly Macedonia and some parts of the world are missing. So yeah, and I would, of course, since I have limited time for each volume, I would often seek out English speakers or other, and there's a whole part of French-speaking authors, for instance. So, but I know there are some anthologies that came out, I think, from a publisher like Future Fire, I think had an anthology that covers some of the Mesopotamian authors and stories. At least, I'm not sure what it's called, but it was maybe 2019 or something like that. So yeah, it's not like these books are lexica. It's like I wish there were some regions I could cover better. And like I said, the first book, Europe, it was kind of centered on Western and North Europe. And that's why Eurasian I brought in Eastern Europe. And maybe if I would do more volumes, I would, and also Asian is kind of limited. So maybe in future volumes, I would find the missing parts. And I've been focusing on Earth. Maybe I should also, you know, have a Space Monsters volume as well. So I'm sorry, Ezgi, but yeah, I know. I have no stories from Turkey. Though in this book there is actually one story who builds on a Turkey monster folklore. So they're not perfect, but you should read them anyway.
Okay, I think we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much.